Let's go ahead and get started. David, can you give us the 30,000-foot view? What is this project? What problem is this project solving?
Well, it probably helps to have a little history here. If you remember back in 2014, the Heartbleed vulnerability was found reported in the OpenSSL crypto library. And although the vulnerability was bad itself, it I think it caused a lot of people to look a little more carefully because, wait a minute, there's a lot of open source software projects that we really depend on, but they aren't getting the kind of support and attention that they needed. So the Linux Foundation created a organization called the Core Infrastructure Initiative to try to resolve this. And frankly, probably Emily should speak up here a little bit on the starting the Core Infrastructure Initiative, and then we can come back to the Badge Project, which is part of the Core Infrastructure Initiative. Emily?
Thanks, David. So as David said, in April of 2014, when Heartbleed was announced, immediately the media started looking at the OpenSSL Foundation and said, hey, wait, everybody depends on OpenSSL, but they're bringing in only $2,000 a year, and they don't have people really dedicated full-time the way that you would expect, given the impact of OpenSSL on the security of the internet. And so Jim Zimmerman with the Linux Foundation called up 20 of the top technology companies who were members of the Linux Foundation and said, hey, this is a tragedy of the commons, and so we should all come together and develop this Core Infrastructure Initiative Fund to ensure that critical infrastructure open source projects are receiving the support that people really expect them to have and which they deserve.
And so so because this is such an important piece of everybody's stuff, I mean, I know like the Libre SSL forked after that to try to alleviate some of those issues. So how does that transition then to have people helping support OpenSSL to something like the Badge Project?
So
either one.
What happened there was first, the Core Infrastructure Initiative, went out and talked to the top 10 projects that you would expect to see if they needed support: OpenSSH, OpenSSL, Network Time, GNU PG. And then after that, the question was, in this broad universe of open source projects, who else needs support? And that's when they brought in David to work on the census, to do kind of a quantitative analysis of open source projects to see if we could get some hints about which projects really needed support. And so then after the key players were kind of covered and taken care of, the question turned then to how else can we support open source in general, and kind of, the rising tide raises all boats and lift everybody up. And that was kind of the genesis of the Best Practices Project, with the thought being that if we codify best practices that the best open source projects are already using, and then people can make sure that they know what those best practices are and demonstrate that they actually are, their project is running using those best practices, then that makes it easy to identify really healthy projects.
Yeah, and I've been looking over the criteria here, like have a stable, just real simple stuff, like have a stable website that says what it does, how to get it, how to give feedback, how to contribute, and preferred styles, and you have to give the license to type whatever it is. I mean, these are things that I've seen over the years, but I've had 30 years of professional work now, or 35 years of professional work. But I know that a lot of the problem is that open source is rapidly expanding, and people don't necessarily get the folklore that I already have had access to. So is this meant to be informative, or is it meant to be maybe more like testing, so that I would look for the best for the badge and not use projects that don't have that?
This is David. I think the short answer is all of the above. I think for many projects, they want to do the right thing, but they may not know what exactly those right things are. I think you've hit the nail on the head because of that expansion. in the world of free Libre open source software. There's a lot of people who don't know what to do, and frankly, there's some old timers who have not realized that some things have changed over the years, and what they did was fine at the time, but some things have become best practices, and they're not aware of it. And of course, a lot of communities, they work hard within the community, but don't necessarily talk to all the other communities out there. So our idea was to try to bring together all those good practices of various projects, the ones in particular that are widely, though not necessarily universally applied, um, and create that list of here's what to do first for the projects so that they'll know, hey, these are what are commonly accepted best practices. And frankly, for people who are looking at possibly using those projects, if a project doesn't follow a lot of those practices, that suggests that maybe that project's in trouble. Um, I'll just hit real. One interesting thing that we did more recently was we went back to OpenSSL, compared their current state with their state just before Heartbleed was announced, and we found out that the OpenSSL project, they didn't meet something like a third of the criteria that we had listed, whereas they meet all of them now. Because they've been focused on trying to, wait a minute, we need to catch up, we need to do the right thing. And I think that's kind of telling. We didn't particularly rig it to do that, but I think that actually hints that we're onto something here. These can't guarantee that the software is going to be free of vulnerabilities or perfect in any way, but at least they're announcing to the world, here's what we're doing. They're trying to make it eliminate some of the key roadblocks towards supporting and improving their software. And by following best practices, they're way more likely to produce good stuff and be able to quickly fix things when there's a problem.
Yeah, some of these are actually reminding me of things that I probably knew at one point, but it sort of slipped my mind. But like, to enable collaborative review, the project source repository must include interim versions for review between releases. It must not only include final releases. And I remember some of the projects we've had here call themselves open source in sort of in name only, because they'll publish the source code for each release, but none of the actual working code. You can't give feedback. You can only you get a final release and that's it. So I'm glad this is all brought together. So how do I, as a project, interact with the badge project?
Oh, glad you asked. I guess we're going to re-emphasize this URL probably, hopefully a couple times here. But basically, go to the website bestpractices.coreinfrastructure.org. And our expectation is basically, someone from the project would say, hey, let's create a badge and enter. We'll automatically fill in some things for you where we can figure it out. But basically, fill in a form. It takes about an hour. We do some automation where we can. We can't do some things automatically at all, but some things we can figure out. And once you fill in that form, in fact, as you fill in the form, you can see how well you're progressing. And when you're done, well, when you're done with the form, you either know, well, here's what I need to do still, or you've done them all, and then congratulations. And either way, you can put the badge on your website to either show, just like, say, a CI system, either that it's passing or it's not, and here's how close you are.
Okay, and how many, are we talking 10 rules or 100 rules, or, how many things are mandatory versus, say, just suggested?
I have to pull out the total number of criteria we have are 66. Now, not all those, as you mentioned, are mandatory. In particular, some things you can have not applicable. There's some things that only apply to particular cases and not others. If you give me just a moment, I'm going to actually pull up the numbers for for some criteria statistics. So here we are. So we've got 66 of those criteria. 42 are musts, 10 are shoulds, and 14 are what we call suggested. The suggestive ones, all you have to do is either admit whether you do or not. And we do it that way because we want to encourage people, even though we know there's a number of reasons why you might not do it. We want to encourage people to do those suggested things, or at least think about doing those things. But for the vast majority, they're actually, you must do those following things unless they're totally not applicable. So 66 criteria takes about an hour, and really it's not hard to do.